The speed of execution now makes it so that these things are possible in a way that I think structurally we would have really struggled with before. And when I look at the example of Scout and how quickly we were able to build that, yeah, AI was the big unlock in the fact that we could actually just take the time and go build something in that short amount of time. But I think what we still had to do was carve out the time and really dedicate ourselves. And we basically had to say everything else is on the back burner for 2 weeks while we go build this. And that was the biggest learning for me, was that even if we had these tools available, if we didn't really get all the right resources aligned and structure it that way, I think 2 months later, we'd still be trying to build this.
Hey, everybody. I'm Hayes Davis, the author of the Uncharted Territory newsletter and occasional podcast host. And we have an awesome guest this morning. He is the VP of GTM Strategy and Operations at Luxury Presence. He also has one of the more challenging names to pronounce, and I'm going to try to do it right. This is Andrew Dejafoy. Did I get it? Did I do okay? You don't have to give me credit, but we're going to talk today about team design, especially in this AI world that we're living in. And I've known Andrew for a while, and we've had the chance to talk about different kinds of teams he's designed over the years. But I think the way he's doing it today at Luxury Presence is really, really fascinating. So I wanted to bring him on to talk about that. So first of all, maybe introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background, and then we'll dive into it.
So yeah, as Hayes said, Andrew Dejafoy. So you were pretty close. So based just outside of Portland, Maine, where I've lived for the last few years, and spent a long time in New York with stints in San Francisco and Boston. I've been a career startup guy and done almost every role there is to do within go-to-market at across 8 or 9 different startups now, which just goes to show you can't always pick them perfectly, because if I could, I probably wouldn't have gotten to 8 or 9 startups, but it's the way it goes. So I have had an interesting career journey where I started out actually as a journalist before going into PR, and then going into digital marketing and advertising in an agency, and then into tech, and spent most of my career in tech leading pre-sales solution consulting teams. Moving into ops was a more recent shift, as about 4 or 5 years ago, made that switch. And there was a perfect blend of sort of taking all that experience I had across all these different go-to-market roles and bringing that to bear, and from a little bit of a different vantage point where I still have my hand in all those different pies, if you will, but not necessarily having to sort of go do those jobs day in and day out. So it gives me a lot of variety, gives me I would say, a broader perspective on how the business operates, and thinking through what is that ideal state customer journey end to end. How do you build the right systems and processes to effectuate that? And it also kind of scratches the data process, a little bit of that solutioning itch that you don't always get.
One of the things I love about talking to people who are in ops roles a lot of times is there's a lot of different paths that people take. And, I don't often hear people coming from journalism, for example. Are there elements of that you bring to bear in terms of how you think about ops?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's one thing that being a journalist taught me at a young age to do, was just ask questions. And that then lended itself really well to solution consulting, which is all about discovery, right? To design a solution for a customer, you first have to understand what business problem they're trying to solve for. And then that in turn lends itself really well to ops. I think the best ops people start with asking questions and seeking to understand before they go to prescribe a solution or jump to, hey, we should do it this way, or reaching for a particular tool. When I led pre-sales teams, one of the things I always coached for was you should be able to solve a problem for a customer in just describing what the solution should look like before you ever even show the software. And to do that effectively, you need to ask the right questions to really deeply understand the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think in a similar way, from an ops perspective, being able to solve a problem for an internal stakeholder that I have, if I immediately jump to, we could implement this tool, or we could do this thing that I've seen, or just try to execute a playbook that I've run before, you're going to have a hard time. You're not going to build that trust that you need with that stakeholder, for one. And two, you're probably just going to get it wrong. So yeah, I think that's probably the common thread. That plus storytelling, right? The ability to construct a narrative. A lot of ops is change management, and being able to tell people the why behind things and give context, I think is hugely important and often gets overlooked.
I really think that right there is incredibly important, especially right now, because I see a lot of people try to execute a playbook, and the playbooks that worked 6 months ago, a year ago, 6 years ago, like that, those things are not necessarily what works now, which I think is a really good segue into what we want to talk about today, which is the way you've designed your ops team. Share with us the way you've put the team together, because I think it's really compelling how you've done this. So share a little bit about how that team's structured, that we can then talk about how you arrived at that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we moved to a few months back is what I've kind of named the squad model, and no real reason particularly about why we called it the squad model, other than I think if you look at a pod or something like that, it has certain connotations. But the idea behind it was fairly simple, that we have a decently large ops team, call it 21, 22 people, but we were organized into these functional specialties. And we were noticing that we just had kind of a breakdown or challenges in terms of getting the right resources all pointed at the same problem at the same time. And meanwhile, we have all these different functional stakeholders, our head of sales, our VP of customer success, our, the team that leads our onboarding for our customers, right? Like we have all these different stakeholders that we have to serve, as well as marketing. And it became really challenging because, let's say our head of sales operations has to get a project done. He didn't really have full sort of authority or responsibility over all the resources he would need to take a project from start to finish, especially with how complex these projects are these days, right? Yeah, if it's something simple like putting together a dashboard or running some analysis or implementing a tool that really only impacts sales, then maybe he could do that. But we ran into some issues when it came to the fact that, okay, we've got a Salesforce team that just manages our Salesforce instance. And if those resources aren't aligned the right way, he might get roadblocked by having to wait for that team to pick up a project that he's got running. So he then is no longer in control over the timeline and when things get delivered. And so we had a lot of people weren't necessarily throwing up their hands, but it was sort of like I'm kind of blocked. I'm waiting for this team to do that for me. And beyond that, I think with the promise of what AI, in many ways, I think the promise has come to fruition in terms of how quickly you can build and execute on things. We didn't want the org structure that we had to get in the way of that and sort of rate limit us on how quickly we could bring new solutions to bear. So this squad model, the idea was that we took each of the senior most people in a given functions ops team, whether it's sales ops, CS ops, launch ops, and we basically said, we're going to put you in this position where you are directly aligned and appear to your functional stakeholder. And then we're going to put a team under you. And in many cases, they already had some direct reports that were, a manager of sales ops, for example, but they didn't have the sort of authority around the other functions. So whether it was RevTech, which is our Salesforce team, we have an AI ops team, we have data and analytics, enablement, and these, what I call kind of our platform teams, were all sort of independent teams before. We decided, hey, let's have them actually dotted line report into these squad leaders, and let's dedicate 70 to 80% of their time to the priorities that are dictated by the squad leaders. We didn't solid line report these people in just because we do think there's value in the subject matter expertise and the growth path for a lot of these people, as well as the flexibility to move people between squads as we need to without totally disrupting and having them change managers every time. But yeah, so these squad leaders now have direct authority over how about 80% of the team's time is spent on, as well as 100% of their direct reports. So that has been a game changer just in terms of them feeling like they have autonomy and authority to make the decisions. It also means they have responsibility and accountability to deliver because now we've removed that biggest barrier for them being able to actually go execute independently.
So tell me a little bit about what you've seen from making this change. What's different now?
Yeah, I think one that I mentioned is that ability to just make decisions faster. So we paired this with a sprint process where we run 2-week sprints, and we pretty much cleared the way for these squad leaders to say, hey, I own a roadmap. And I basically decide what gets put on that roadmap, what gets prioritized in partnership with my functional stakeholder. And I think a couple of the major changes that we've seen is we've shifted some of the responsibility for, I guess, probably addressing a lot of the root cause issues that have popped up over time. That's one of the big changes. So when we had this more functionally aligned, our RevTech team, for example, was just drowning in tickets, right? It got to a point where they were kind of just ticket takers and just reactive all the time. I'm sure that's something a lot of ops leaders can relate to, but nobody really on the ops side had that ownership. Like they weren't incentivized necessarily to go solve for these gaps. Now, if they have the resource aligned to them, that is the one that has to put out those fires and respond to those tickets, but then that becomes a blocker to them working on bigger projects. Now we can say, all right, you've got a Salesforce dev that's assigned to you. Do you want them just responding to tickets and helping people with bugs, or do you want them to actually go fix those root causes so that you get more of their capacity and time to spend on bigger projects? And so that was a big shift is we've actually seen our overall support ticket volume go down in part because the teams are now taking full ownership end to end of the root cause issues or the gap closure. So instead of just putting out fires because the RevTech team doesn't have the operational expertise or the subject matter expertise to know, maybe this needs to be a process design change or this needs to be enablement. Now we've got a squad leader who's looking at it holistically and saying, hey, this common issue is actually an enablement gap, or we need to redo this process. And that's more of a business challenge. I kind of say that we have more business process debt than we do technical debt in many ways, right? And so now they are fully empowered to go solve those problems. And we're finding there's a downstream impact because we're addressing root causes that before were just getting ignored or getting Band-Aid fixes. That's one really big one. The other is this stakeholder satisfaction is much higher. All of our stakeholders feel like they have a much higher degree of visibility and influence over the roadmap of the team. And then also just the ability to execute on projects. And I'll give one example that we can dive a little bit deeper into. But in addition to having, the typical ops resources that we might have, we actually have this AI ops team that are really just engineers that are kind of more AI forward. And we've embedded them in as well. And we've actually been able to go develop and launch full internal apps that our teams are using. And one example is the tool that we just launched actually last week when I was in Austin. We launched something called Scout, which is essentially a tool for our CSMs to use that is kind of a hybrid customer 360 plus task management. And we were able to take this literally from concept to a V1 in beta testing in a week and a half. Just because we aligned the right resources, we had them all on the squad. We didn't really have to ask anybody for permission. We had everybody lined up and ready to go, and we were able to just go execute extremely quickly on building this. And now we launched it, and it's a pretty incredible thing to see a team that's almost more like a product team that can go take something like this to life in such a short amount of time and bring it to market, if you will.
I want to just add to this. I've actually seen briefly this app. This isn't just like a couple of screens and like a thing to just organize some lists. It looks and acts like a really quite mature SaaS app. And I was just impressed by the breadth of it and the way it organized, entire workflows. And so, when we're talking about this model, Drew, I think one of the things that's interesting here is this isn't just like, hey, we're gonna make it easier to fix support tickets and we're going to build a better dashboard or something. We're talking about kind of rethinking entire workflows, like to your point about business process. And so, one of the things that you've mentioned a couple of times is the roadmap. All right. And so it sounds like you're really leaning on these squad leaders to really be product leaders and really kind of manage an entire roadmap. And so I'm curious about that, because a lot of this seems like it hinges on how those leaders are able to drive that kind of process and prioritize and do that. So I'm actually, where I'm going with this is I'm curious, like, what kind of person is that? How do you get the right person in a seat like that? Because it's kind of a hybrid role.
Yeah, and it's a good question. I do think the role of ops leaders has evolved a bit in this new world, at least in this model. They almost resemble a little bit more like product managers or product leaders than we ever have in the past. And so I think the characteristics that I would look for, again, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, that natural curiosity, asking questions. Those things are just as important for product leaders as they are for ops people, right? So that doesn't necessarily change, but I think it makes it all that much more important for ops leaders and ops professionals to get in front of your actual internal customers, the end users, the people who are struggling day to day with the systems that maybe you've built. And so, yeah, I think the profile has changed a little bit. And I have to give the lion's share of the credit to Scout and its success to Jill Lenoble, who's on my team, and she leads CS Ops for us. She was less than 3 months in here at LP when I gave her this challenge and I said, "Hey, can you build this in 2 weeks?" And she just didn't even blink. And she was like, "Yeah, let's make it happen." I think what enabled her to do that was an instinct that she had even before that challenge came, that one of the first things she had to do was go spend time in the office, in the field with people who were doing the job. Like, she's actually picked up the phones and taken CS and support calls as basically doing a day in the life of those people. And I think that instinct and that sort of desire to get that close to it, but also then being able to zoom out and take that product manager's lens of, like, you can't just respond to every request and build every feature that gets asked for. And while we have collapsed the build cycles considerably, you still have finite resources, and finite amount of time and attention to build things. And so you do still need that kind of like product taste or judgment, I think, is a critical skill that now we have to look for, which maybe you didn't really need in a lot of ops people before.
Any advice for folks on how to look for that?
Yeah. When I led pre-sales teams, I always used to have every candidate do some type of demo. And I used to always say, I don't really care. You could demo Microsoft Word, but if you could make it if you could make that a really compelling presentation, you're pretty much a shoo-in for the job. But
Got a lot of buttons.
yeah. And in a similar way, I always like having candidates do some type of project or task. In ops, presentation skills are, I would say, important as leaders, but not necessarily the core skill set. But we have everybody build something. If you get to the late stages here, you could have interviewed phenomenally well every step of the way. But we give you a brief and say, hey, go build something, go use AI. And we actually tell people, we actually encourage you, if you build something, you don't use AI, that's actually almost a problem at this point. So yeah, we give people a project and say, build something that would resemble like a prototype. We're not looking for a full app or anything, but something that shows you have that way of thinking about solving a problem, that demonstrates you have subject matter expertise in that space. You have that problem solving mentality, and you actually are a builder, right? And you can actually do something. And so we don't give people a ton of time to do this. So they have to be able to produce something under a relatively compressed timeline. And then, we have them record a Loom or a video of them running through it. And then we do like a panel Q&A. And that's been a huge, I would say, filtering function where somebody could have interviewed phenomenally well, and then they couldn't really build something that was compelling, or maybe they misunderstood the assignment and just put slides together of what they would build instead. So it becomes a good litmus test of whether somebody has that building mentality or builder's gene that I think is even more important these days.
Is this a take home kind of thing where they go and do this over, some number, next 24 hours or something like that? And then who is in the room or reviewing the output, and how do you kind of collect all that and get feedback on it?
Yeah. So I think it partly depends on the specific role. If it is more of an ops type role, it's probably more of a take home and say you've got, call it 48 hours or 72 hours to sit with this, review it. We have a prompt that we send out. We want to, first of all, make sure that everybody gets the exact same prompt. So we, don't bias the selection one way or the other. But then I also like to sort of purposely keep the prompts somewhat vague. I find that, again, goes back to the intellectual curiosity component of it. If I send somebody a prompt and I don't give you a lot of details and you don't ask me follow-up questions, I'm going to maybe not hold that against you, but it is going to be in the back of my mind, right? And if you miss the mark, then I'm going to be like, well, you had an opportunity to ask questions and you didn't take it. And I'll often volunteer and say, hey, if you have questions, let me know. Happy to spend more time with you. And I'm always surprised how many people don't take me up on that, right? So that's one thing. Maybe just a pro tip if anybody watches this with an interview coming up for me. That's a little bit of a tip, but so that's one thing is look for that intellectual curiosity by seeing if they look for opportunities to learn more. I mean, doing research on the company and trying to find information on their own is like absolute table stakes, but I want people who are going to go that extra mile. Then we have a panel of people that are a good cross section of our ops team. So I'd probably want somebody like Carrie, who leads our RevTech team, to be weighing in on just their general Salesforce knowledge and whether they think about from a builder's perspective. I've got Christian, who leads our AI ops team, who might come in and kind of test them on the AI knowledge set. And then I also like to bring in, if I'm hiring for a more technical role, I might bring in our CTO as part of the panel, especially if it's a more senior role. And then I also like to bring in the stakeholders themselves. I think it's critically important that when you're hiring and building teams that are going to be supporting sales, for example, I want a sales leader to have a voice in that. I don't ever want to be cramming somebody down a sales leader's throat that they didn't feel like they gave the thumbs up on, right? Doesn't mean we always agree. And sometimes we have different perspectives. And there are times I've made a decision to hire somebody when maybe the function leader wasn't 100% on board. Sometimes we prove them wrong. Sometimes we don't. But I think if nothing else, you got to start off that ops person that you hire on kind of the right foot, and having that buy-in from the leader is, I think, a huge part of that. In terms of the take home versus other types of exercises, we actually have done for some of our roles that are more technical. We might do a live fire exercise where it's sort of like, hey, show up with your Claude or ChatGPT login or your Cursor login, and we're going to give you a prompt live. And it's kind of like the traditional coding tests. We're not looking for perfection there, but we do want to see kind of how do you think through solving a problem. One of the interesting things to control for with that is the dead air problem of like, what do you do when Claude is writing your code?
Yeah.
So we make sure we have a good way for them to kind of like explain their thought process as they go through that. But we typically will reserve that more for people who are going to be doing the build work, just to make sure that they truly are comfortable navigating the tools in real time, as opposed to somebody who is not necessarily going to be the hands-on builder. We just want them to be familiar with the concepts and able to navigate it, even if they're not super fast with it.
Well, so obviously AI has been deeply infused into this conversation so far, and basically every conversation, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
So some of what you're talking about, I think, is timeless process of figuring out how to prioritize things properly with stakeholders, good ops. Like the big challenge of ops is, how do I make sure that I'm not just spending all my time keeping the lights on versus like advancing what we're doing, all that stuff. So some of the things you're bringing up are things that are just like, this is how to run an ops team, right? But then some of the things you're bringing up, like, oh, we're going to take 2 weeks and build a mature SaaS application. That's a new thing, all right? And so I'm curious how you think about AI as a kind of phenomenon that enables this.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is the speed of execution now makes it so that these things are possible in a way that I think structurally we would have really struggled with before. And when I look at the example of Scout and how quickly we were able to build that, yeah, AI was the big unlock in the fact that we could actually just take the time and go build something in that short amount of time. But I think even with that tool, what we still had to do was carve out the time and really dedicate ourselves. And we basically had to say, pretty much everything else is on the back burner for 2 weeks while we go build this. And that was the biggest learning for me, was that even if we had these tools available, if we didn't really get all the right resources aligned and structure it that way, I think 2 months later, we'd still be trying to build this and wouldn't get it over. And so I think if I look at the way things were done before, even if I had given my ops people a team of engineers and product managers to support them and all that, if you can't do that focused, time boxed sort of execution like that, that I think was the biggest unlock, right? I could have given those resources to a team knowing that it's probably going to take them 3-4 months to go build something that now could be done in less than 2 weeks. But the problem is, the longer those timelines stretch on, that natural pull from all these people, like, you can't go tell all your stakeholders, hey, we're going to take the next 4 months and we're not going to give you anything until we build this great new thing, right? And then you're kind of stuck in the more traditional waterfall style development cycles where it takes you that long to build and ship something. And then, maybe you missed the mark, or maybe it's missing key features and now you got to go back and it takes another month to get the new features in there. So I think the AI part of it unlocked the ability to even do this in the first place, but we had to pair that with the right expectation management and time boxing of the project. Like, I think if we hadn't said you have 2 weeks to go do this and we're clearing everything off your calendar, it would. So I think that's really the biggest component of it. The other is, well, AI and all these tools have made it so much more accessible for anybody to build an app on their own. We still have legitimate engineers who are driving it, because there's a lot that goes into this that, some random person with an Anthropic subscription isn't going to be able to solve for. There's security, there's integration, and how do you host it in a secure way? All these things have to be taken into account. And I think ultimately what it has enabled, though, is somebody like Jill, who was the driving force behind Scout. I gave her this task, and within 2 hours, she had a prototype that she was able to put together using AI that was clickable, that when she handed over to the engineer, he was able to take that. And then 12 hours later, we had a functioning app, right? So I think it's the real value in my mind is kind of compressing that idea to having a tangible product that you can touch and feel with and like actually play with and iterate and get feedback on was a critical part of it. I think, just random side note, I know it's not directly related to the question, but one of the key learnings too, in terms of how you build with AI, because you can do it so much faster, and if you time box it like this, the other really big learning that we had was taking actual CSMs and making them part of the build team. So we took a CSM and said, you're part of this team. And so for the next 2 weeks, you still have to do some keep the lights on stuff for your clients. But for the most part, you're going to be in the war room. You're going to be in there day in and day out with this team. And, our engineer, Gal, is going to push something live, and he's going to ping you on Slack and say, hey, I need you to test this. And you're going to do it right then and there. And you're going to give feedback. And that just massively sped up the iteration cycles, which allowed us to deliver in such a short amount.
There's something, we tend to think about the iteration cycles as like a quantitative difference. Like, oh, this would have taken 4 months. Now it takes 2 weeks. But I think that does produce a real qualitative difference. There's the old axiom in sales that, time kills deals, right? And time kills any initiative, right? Whether it's a thing you want to build internally, whether it's an external deal, whatever it is, that the longer something takes, there's this opportunity cost that just accrues. It is fundamentally much easier to say we're going to go, hard on this for 2 weeks than to say we're going to manage a project over the course of 4 months. I think about projects that I've been responsible for delivering in the past to, internal stakeholders. And you want to include, like you said, the CS folks in it. And it's like, okay, great. In a couple of weeks, we'll have a prototype you can click around in, right? They've forgotten about whatever you're talking about then. And then in another few weeks, we'll do, UAT or something, and there's just no momentum. And I think one of the things that you're talking about is this ability to just build this incredible momentum within a team that can culminate within sort of the attention span of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think momentum is a huge part of it. I also think making it engaging and frankly fun
Mhm.
And I have to give a shout out here in particular, to Gal Gordon, who was the lead engineer on this project. And he had this idea to do a leaderboard, and
Mhm.
you get points for unlocking achievements. And we really gamified it. And at first, when I heard about that, I was like, yeah, okay, that could be interesting. I have never seen CSMs act this competitively. I mean, we have people like getting so hyped in the office last week about reclaiming the top spot in the leaderboard. And of course, we put prizes against that. And it's been a huge driver of that. So I think people need to keep in mind there's a cultural element of it. So yeah, the speed of execution and being able to build something fast is great. But if you are promising something for months, you lose that momentum. You sort of lose trust. And frankly, before this, we had been promising better tooling for our CSMs for months, if not years. And now we were able to come in and, we didn't make a whole bunch of fanfare about it until we decided to really go heads down on this. But then when we went to the team and said, hey, I think we've got a solution to the problem, it was already built instead of having been promised, or, a project update that they saw in, some email every quarter that never came to fruition. So I think that combination of momentum and then making sure you nail the change management by making it fun, making it engaging. I mean, we literally had rap battles where we put people in teams and had them write a rap about Scout last week. The type of stuff that personally makes me get like secondhand embarrassment. But, the team loved it. They had a blast. We had people doing karaoke. Like it was incredible. And all
That's
that
going to be
stuff
the
matters.
takeaway from this, by the way, is rap
Yeah,
battles.
right.
Battle for this
Exactly.
person. Yeah.
They also did, I did not participate in this, but they did laughing yoga, which I'd never heard of before. Apparently it was a hit and everybody loved it. So Google that on your own. I can't promise the results will all be super safe, but it was, the team had a blast with it. But yeah, like now though, if you just look at the speed of execution and the momentum component of it, we're just over a week after launch and I'm already kind of going, oh no, like what do we do to keep the momentum up? Right. And so, as much as it has compressed things and allowed us to deliver faster, it just also puts that much more pressure on keeping that momentum up.
Well, so I actually I want to touch on that a little bit, right? So we've talked about a bunch of wins here. And one of my favorite interview questions is, especially when I was interviewing software engineers in a past life, is I would have them tell me all about a project that they worked on. And we get into the architectural details and all things they're really proud of. And then I would say, what's wrong with it, right? What I always wanted to see is like someone who's got an ability to critique. Going back to that software engineering time in my life, like the most fun part of building software is when you ship that first version. That's the exciting piece. And then after that, you got to maintain it. And so one of the things that I think is really important when people are making decisions to build is kind of understanding that. But so that's one aspect of, kind of what I'm thinking about here. But I'm curious, when you look at the design you've put together, there's obviously a bunch of wins that are coming from this. What are the things you foresee as potential challenges or challenges that you've already encountered across both the build versus buy spectrum, as well as the personnel spectrum and kind of the org design? Like, where are the potential gotchas?
Yeah, I will say it's perfect. There are no problems with it.
Okay.
So
All right.
I
We're
don't
done then.
understand the question. No, I'm kidding. I think, any organizational structure decision you make is going to come with trade-offs. And I think the biggest one that, if I'm being honest, we still are trying to figure out the exact right balance to strike is weighing serving the functional needs of the business and sort of what we would call the platform support and maintenance, right? So I referred to earlier these platform teams, like our Salesforce developer team. Enablement, I would call arguably a platform team, or AI ops team that manages N8N and does all the automation work, as well as analytics, right? These are all almost like sub functions within ops, but the key difference is that they own and maintain specific platforms that serve everybody. And when you start to align everybody by functions, there are things that cut cross-functionally or that are just about the platform itself that need to be maintained that you risk losing some visibility or ownership of, right? So if you've got 3 people and they're dedicated to sales and marketing ops and CS ops and launch ops, who's really owning just the overall health of Salesforce, right? Or owning the overall health of our BI platform. And so we tried to balance that by saying, hey, in any given sprint, 20 to 30% of the story points that we assign out for those people will be dedicated to platform work. Sounds nice in theory. I think in practice, the reality is the squads tend to consume the vast majority of the time. And I think what we're shifting to is as we move into these like dedicated focused build cycles and kind of what I'm saying for each squad, I want to have us like once or twice a quarter go do one of these deep focused build sprints. That is sort of like, yeah, you're going to take 100% of your allocated resources time, but then maybe the platform leaders also need to do their own dedicated sprint where they get 100%. So it should balance out in the long run to being roughly a 70-30 split, but we do still need them to put the time and effort into that. So I think that's one of the key learnings. And then I think getting more specific, if I look at the Scout project or any of the build versus buy, I think there's a balance you have to strike in terms of trying to nail the perfect solution in a V1 versus recognizing that there's some things that just you should make a conscious decision that like, yes, we know we want that. We don't need that to have it get up and running and provide real value. And as an example, this is a tool that largely does task management. Is it as automated as I would like it to be? Is it doing as much around leveraging data to prioritize tasks for CSMs and help them stack rank their priorities day to day? No, we're not quite there yet. Is it a massive leap from where they were? 100%. But we already kind of know what needs to go into V2, to really kind of keep that momentum going and continue to drive that improvement. So those are probably the biggest learnings on both the structure side and the actual build versus buy side.
Got it. That makes sense. I'm kind of curious on the platform side, because this is when you first, sort of told me about this design. That was my, one of the things that I initially thought about is how do you keep some level of cohesion for the platform teams? I'm curious how your platform leaders have tried to optimize for having these folks who are cross-cutting across these groups and ensuring that there is some, I'm just thinking about software from the standpoint of like, okay, consistency of implementation, right? If we're going to build this application for CS and we're going to build this application for sales, and they're all going to touch Salesforce in certain ways. Like, how do we keep that consistent? So how have your platform leaders tried to work in this model?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things there. One, that's part of the reason I explicitly wanted to keep the platform team members reporting on a direct line basis to the leaders of the teams that they already were on. And I still want a level of team culture and cohesion within those platform teams for that, for a lot of those reasons you mentioned. For example, we just went and built Scout. Now, if it's going to be a different Salesforce developer and a different engineer who works on that, I want them to be able to learn and get those best practices. And that's one. And then the other is the standards of quality around what we implement. So in our Salesforce team, for example, we have our leader of that team, Carrie, who she's involved. Like she touches all these projects in some way and is able to kind of pattern match and recognize. And we're looking at potentially putting in more of a technical lead who is going to do things like code reviews and things like that. So that anything that gets pushed gets shared out. And the team still comes together and does like show and tell. It talks about what they've built and shares key learnings. So I think by not like we could have taken all those people and had them direct line report in and like eliminated the platform teams entirely. But I think that would have been a mistake because then they would have been fully siloed and really wouldn't have those opportunities to work together and share. Another example is like N8N we use as our automation platform run by our AI ops team. And that was a real concern too, is if we go put these engineers under the squads, do we lose that ability to keep just maintaining that? So we actually worked out a rotating schedule where each one of the engineers takes responsibility for like platform uptime and maintenance. Like if something goes wrong and automation breaks, any one of those engineers is like kind of on call for that week to jump in and take it. So it kind of varies a little bit by platform team and the nature of the actual platform they support. Another example is actually on our analytics team. We're a little bit understaffed, so we don't really follow the exact same model. That is a little like we've moved more towards a model where if we have a request, it kind of goes into a central funnel and we kind of just, don't have as dedicated resources as we probably would like. But yeah, so every team kind of comes up with what works with them. But the biggest thing is making sure that all of the leaders, like we have a weekly meeting where we just talk about and surface any of these issues. And there's an expectation that everybody has to work together. One of our cultural values here that I really like is egoless collaboration. And I think if there's one value that I think we've done an exceptionally good job at maintaining in our hiring is looking for people who embody that. And I don't think this model would really work that well if you didn't have people who come to the table with the idea of like, how do we work together and solve our common goals first and foremost over what's best for me personally.
Well, I actually think that's a really good place to wrap it up. I'd honestly love to keep going on the conversation, but I think this is a really good view into how this team structure is working for you. So, Drew, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Great to talk to you as always.